Hi guys, we're going to talk about standard 13 and 14 today. Um, Go ahead and get this started. So before we've been talking about how um, the country seemed to be doing real well. We were in the Gilded Age, and Gilded has that light gold cover that looks really shiny, but when you get down into it, it was nasty. Um, People were living in poverty, and there were only a few people who had a lot of money, but they owned a ton of it. And those were the monopolists, like John D. Rockefeller with Standard Oil. So you get this movement called the progressive movement, and you're trying to progress through all that trash. If you read The Jungle, you read about Upton Sinclair and the book that he wrote talking about how bad the meatpacking industry was. And what it did was expose corruption. And those people who exposed corruption were called muckrakers. And so when you say muckrakers, you want to think these people wanted to expose something going wrong. Well, there were two that we talked about, Sinclair and Tarbell. Ida Tarbell, she exposed how bad Rockefeller was treating the workers. Her dad worked for Rockefeller, and so she wrote a story about it, and people were horrified that somebody could get treated so poorly. These people are called muckrakers because they wanted to progress and help society and industry. Well, each muckraker was a progressive, but not every progressive was a muckraker. And I use this example in class for another topic. But every girl in our class is a student, but not every student in our class is a girl. So, if that's the case, every muckraker is a progressive. Not every progressive is a muckraker. Progressives want to improve people's lives. They want the government to step in and say, hey, this is wrong, and this is how it has to be. We have to set regulations. So here you have Jane Addams, and she worked in Chicago. She built the whole house. And what it did is it gave immigrants and poor people rights and medical care and just basic schooling that they needed to live normally. Now, it didn't give them houses and nice stuff, but it gave them just the basic necessities that they could live. So Jane Addams was a progressive, but she was not a muckraker. She did not expose corruption. She just helped progress through the Gilded Age and help America lead a better, Americans lead better lives. And I'm going to let y'all read each slide before I click to the next one. Of all the things that we talk about throughout all 25 standards, this is the most difficult for students to grasp. Because y'all haven't had a chance to vote, it's tough for y'all to see and understand this process. So if we have people in America who don't have much power and they don't have a voice, then they can't make changes. Well, during the progressive era, there were more changes to our voting system and people's power that allowed them to have a bigger voice. And if people have a bigger voice, change is the result. We can change things. We have more control. So these election reforms are very, very important for us, and we still have them today. So there are three of them. Initiative. The people take initiative to force a vote on any issue that they want. If we want to legalize marijuana, well, if enough people signed enough petitions and submitted it to the state legislature, then we would be able to make a change. And that's the key. And this thing is coming back on, so I will get it out of the way. So the people take the initiative. That's the first step. Referendum is the second and final step. When the people submit an initiative, it is up to the government, the state governments, or the national government to allow us, the people, to vote. We vote on a referendum. So the people take the initiative and they vote on the referendum. So if you see state legislature or anything about the voting process, then you know that it's a referendum. The last one's easy. Everybody can think of or remember recall. And it's basically we elect somebody, they get into power, and they start doing crazy things that they said that they wouldn't do and they promised they wouldn't do, and they're horrible politicians. We can recall those people to have a special vote. Now, it's not easy because politicians don't want us, every time we get mad at something, to recall them. So it's a hard process. There are a lot of steps that people have to follow, and it has to have a wide support from a lot of people, and that's tough to do. So you're not recalled and thrown out. You're recalled for a special election. So to recap, we got 3: initiative, referendum, and recall. Initiative, the people force a vote on an issue or law. Referendum, they vote through a referendum. So when they go to the polling place, they go to the little box. It says referendum 2.4, do you support the legalization of marijuana in the state of Georgia? And you vote yes or no. So that's the referendum. Recall is simple. We just say, hey, this guy or girl sucks, and we want a new election. All right, the 17th Amendment. We already have the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. Remember, the 13th, you have to be free, so it freed all slaves. Before you can be a citizen, that's the 14th. You have to be a citizen before you can vote, and all males had the right to vote thanks to the 15th Amendment. The 16th Amendment called for a income tax. The 17th Amendment allows the people to elect our senators. Senators serve for 6 years, and representatives serve for 2. So it goes 2, 4, 6. Representatives for 2, presidents for 4, senators for 6. So 6 years is a long time, and the founding fathers didn't think that we were smart enough to be able to elect someone to serve for 6 years, so they didn't give us that opportunity. The 17th Amendment gives us this opportunity, and it occurred in 1913. And if you can elect senators, that equals more power. So just think 17th Amendment, senators. And this is an assignment. Don't worry about assignment. Read this one. All right. I want you to put a box on a sheet of paper. Do it right now. I know you think it's lame. I don't care. And in that box, I want you to write 4 things, because they're all the same. I want you to write Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow laws. I want you to write segregation. Separate but equal. And Plessy versus Ferguson. We'll say it again. Jim Crow laws, segregation, separate but equal, and Plessy versus Ferguson. The reason you wrote those in a box is because they're all the same thing. Jim Crow laws is what they were called in the South. And so African Americans have all of these rights now. They're citizens, and all males can vote. To limit that, the South passes these Jim Crow laws, and it prevents African Americans from being equal. Jim Crow laws are segregation laws. Segregation, the definition is separate but equal. And what made all of those three things legal is Plessy versus Ferguson. Plessy was a man who traveled on a train, and he was 1/8 African American. And because he was 1/8, that meant he was considered African American. And those were the stipulations back then. Anybody with African American blood was considered an African American. Well, they made him ride in a separate car, and he sued, and the Supreme Court upheld segregation, which is separate but equal, called Jim Crow laws in the South. So all four of those things are the same thing. And that's why you put that box, and if you remember that box, then any question they ask you, you'll get right, because you know the definition, you know what it's called in the South, and you know what it made it legal. Something that we now know y'all have heard of today is the NAACP. And this this organization was created to fight Jim Crow laws, segregation, separate but equal, Plessy versus Ferguson. And they're still around today, and they fight for African American equality and make sure that people are upholding the laws and not using discrimination to keep African Americans from achieving equality. So the NAACP. Read it. Teddy Roosevelt became president after William McKinley was shot. William McKinley was president. Teddy Roosevelt was vice president. And so he became president at the turn of the century, in the early 1900s. So when he becomes president, he really changes the presidency. And he's a progressive. So just think, Teddy Roosevelt, progressive. He wants to progress. He wants to break up these monopolies. He wants to break up these trusts. He wants to provide competition and increase regulation to help us progress through the Gilded Age and become a better country. One of the things he did is he was a conservationist. And what he did, he reserved national parks and forests for conservation so that we wouldn't come in and tear it down and ruin the natural beauty of the United States. So he creates Yellowstone, Yosemite, all these national parks that helped us preserve nature. And this guy was a big hunter, and I will show you a picture later about him. Let's read this long slide. So, if you remember, we used the Chinese labor for cheap and dangerous work in building the western part of the Transcontinental Railroad. Remember in the west, the picture you drew or didn't draw or didn't do a good job drawing. And so then once we get it built, we have all these people living in the United States who are challenging Americans for jobs. So what do? We don't need the Chinese anymore. We kept them from coming in. So we kept any more Chinese immigrants from coming in, and this was at the turn of the century under Roosevelt. So you can tell Roosevelt is kind of a racist individual. We're going to get into this slide next. are coming up. But there's a debate. Some people are like, we shouldn't go and take over other countries and be imperialists. Others said, hey, we should because we're better, kind of like the Manifest Destiny idea that we had already achieved thanks to the Mexican-American War. Read it. We've already gone over this. We'll go over it again. Alright, so we fight Spain in two different places, and neither one occurred in America or in Spain. In 1898, we go to war, and we fight in Cuba and the Philippines. We defeated the Spanish in both places. So Spain is gone out of Cuba and the Philippines. We fought in Cuba, and then we left. So Cuba gains their independence. And you see Cuba there is 90 miles from the coast of Florida. So it's really close to us. We wouldn't really gain a whole lot from taking it over. But we leave the naval base of Guantanamo Bay. Read it. So in 1898, when the war started, Teddy Roosevelt was the Assistant Secretary to the Navy. He quit and went and formed his own little unit called the Rough Riders. And he went and chose the best of the best, the most athletic, the most intelligent people he could find. And these were like an elite cavalry unit. And he's known for charging up San Juan Hill. And from this, he gains a lot of popularity, which leads to his vice presidency, and then he's elected again in 1904, and decides not to run in 1908, but we'll get to that later. There's old Teddy Roosevelt and his cavalry unit coming down San Juan Hill. Read it. So I told you we fought the Spanish-American War in two places. In the Philippines, we fought and defeated the Spanish, and they won their independence until we didn't leave. We stayed there. And the Filipino people got really mad, and so they fought against us in a guerrilla war. And it was guerrilla warfare because we didn't know who we were fighting, and they would attack us and then run. So it was difficult. It lasted 3 years, and we won and stayed there until 1946. We were actually kicked out of the Philippines by the Japanese, only to return later when Douglas MacArthur fulfilled his promise of "I shall return." And when he was leaving, he made the statement, "I shall return," and we did. We came in and defeated the Japanese, and they had to leave. So we kept it until after the war. And after World War II, we gave it back to the Filipino people. And now they are an independent nation. And you can see there's the Philippines. And that's where the typhoon hit recently that really destroyed a lot of their houses and killed thousands of people. Alright, so imperialism. It's when we take over a place for our own gain. And we obtain Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. We already talked about the Philippines, but Guam and Puerto Rico were also taken while Cuba gains their independence. We were not imperialistic in Cuba. And then we also gain Hawaii, which later becomes a state. But on the test, you'll see Guam and Puerto Rico. Read it. Alright, so we already know the Monroe Doctrine. it told all European powers to stay out of the Western Hemisphere, which is North, Central, and South America. So he told Europe to stay out. Roosevelt comes in and increases the Monroe Doctrine. He adds to it. So it's called the Roosevelt Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, like the Roosevelt addition to the Monroe Doctrine. And so all he did was just say, look, yep, Europe still has to stay out, but if there's an economic crisis or any kind of uprising, or we feel like we need to help in any way, then we can. So it's basically saying we're going to be the police of the Western Hemisphere. And it really kind of oversteps our boundary, saying, oh, we're so tough, we're going to go in there and do what, we'll help everybody out. And we're the big brother, we're going to bring aid to everybody. He really just used this as a way to gain access to the Panama Canal. So we can intervene whenever we want, and we use the term economic crisis, but it could be to help somebody gain independence, or if there's an uprising and we don't like their leader, we can help it, or if we do like their leader, we can help stop it. So the Roosevelt Edition expands the Monroe Doctrine. Read it. So, read it, and then we'll talk about the story. So the country of Colombia controlled a large amount of area, more than it does today. They wanted to sell their Panama Canal for $25 million, or this small area of land. It's like the easiest place to build a canal from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. And we could have built it somewhere else, but it would have taken a lot longer and been more dangerous. This was just the smallest piece of land. And Colombia was willing to sell it to us for $25 million, but Teddy Roosevelt said, nope, we want it for 10. And so what he does is he says, okay, we're going to use the Roosevelt Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine to justify us, and we're going to help these Panamanian people out. It was an ethnic group called the Panamanians. And we said, hey, if you start a revolution, we'll help you. So when they started their revolution, we brought in our warships, and we're going to talk about those in a second, and intimidated the Colombians into basically allowing the Panamanians to gain their independence. When they did, we bought the land for $10 million from the Panamanian government and started the construction of the canal. Read it. Panama Canal is real simple. We don't have to go around South America anymore. We can go straight through Panama, and it cuts down on our trade time, and our military can travel efficiently. And when we're attacked at Pearl Harbor, we can easily get our eastern ships to the western side of the United States a lot easier. So it helped a lot. And there's a picture of it there. Don't look at the red line. I want you to look at the bottom right hand corner and see Colombia. They owned all that land. And when the Panamanians revolted, we were able to build that canal. And you see how short it is and how easy it would be, even though we lost a lot of people that built it to yellow fever because it was real swampy, and it took a while to build because of the swamp. But it was easier than trying to go through a larger landmass. And there's the Panama Canal today. You see the how the water is higher, closer to you. Those were basically dams and levees that would lower the water, and you travel through that next little spot, and the water level would lower again. You travel out, lower again, and then you're at sea level. And this allows for large ships to be able to travel over the rocky terrains. Not every place is easy to dig that deep, so if you just use levees, then you can control the amount of water that in each little section there. Read it. The Great White Fleet was Teddy Roosevelt's big stick. He had an African proverb saying that he lived by that says, "Speak softly, carry a big stick." And one of his things that he wanted to impress the world upon was his Great White Fleet. And he would sell it to Japan and China and Europe, and he would show everybody how big we were as a naval power. 'Cause remember, he was Assistant Secretary of the Navy, so he had a fondness for the naval branch of our military. So he built this huge naval fleet and kind of tries to intimidate the rest of the world, and he did so and was able to, like I said, take Guam, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, and we became imperialistic under Teddy Roosevelt and before him during the Spanish-American War. And there's a picture of our Great White Fleet in the Pacific. And I know those ships today don't look like they would do anything, but back then they were the top of the class. That's in the Pacific. If you've ever been to Hawaii, you see mountains like that coming out of the ocean. There are volcanoes that have hardened, and you'll see a lot of greenery on those on the lands. If you've ever been to Hawaii, you see it's just green everywhere, and it's beautiful. But that's our Great White Fleet. Here's another picture. And it just goes on for miles. And so when people would see this is the Atlantic Fleet, they would see this and just be stunned at how strong we appeared. And so this is really when the U.S. becomes a formidable naval and military power, thanks to Panama Canal and our ships. And we're done. Test on Friday, Thursday and Friday. So if you're first or fifth, you're listening to this, we'll have a test on Thursday over this stuff. If you are second, fourth, or sixth, we'll have it on Friday. Alright. Hope you enjoyed our latest session of The Worst Voice in America. Bye-bye.